Good evening, gentlemen. Our first question will have a 2-minute response time. It deals with the issue of earmarks. The term earmark is often presented in a negative context without much explanation for what they are and why they're such a bad thing. Indeed, the term has been used in such a context in this campaign. Ultimately, however, earmarks are an important part of the congressional budgeting process. So I'd like each of you to briefly explain your views of earmarks and the role that they play, and to discuss how you might reform their use in the legislative process.
You want us to go back and forth in order, or how I'm not sure.
It's for audio. I'm not sure if it'll work. We'll have to play around with it. I think we're...
Yeah,
if it's working, I will mess with it. I'll just leave it so you can speak it.
An earmark results from a request by a senator to have federal money spent in a particular state, locality, or on behalf of a particular business. The reason why earmarks have come to become such a problem is that they've been abused and they haven't been brought forward with adequate openness and transparency to ensure that they're not abused. Sometimes those who have defended the earmark process will point out that if you add up all the federal funds that are budgeted through the earmark process, you might end up with a line on a bar graph that looks like this. Whereas if you added up all entitlement spending, it would look like this. And so they say, let's not worry about this when we ought to be worrying about this. The problem with that reasoning is that a lot of the time, it's this that's driving this. It's kind of like you're looking at a mile-long freight train. The engine car is only this much when you look at it from a distance. But the engine car is what's driving the freight train. And that's exactly what earmarks do. They lubricate the big spending practices in our federal government. And they're out of control, and they've contributed to a sprawling entitlement state and sprawling debt that's crushing our economy. So what I advocate is serious reform that would begin first with a 1-year categorical ban on all earmark spending. Congress needs to go off the bottle for 1 whole year to prove that it can do it, so that it can realize the American people will not die without the earmark. And I would follow that categorical ban, whether it passed in the Senate or not. I myself will not participate for a minimum of 1 year after I'm in the U.S. Senate to prove this point and to help drive forward this 1-year ban. After that, earmark spending ought to resume if and only if Congress has achieved a permanent, lasting solution that will ensure openness and transparency. One that I would do would be requiring all earmark requests to be made public within 7 days, no less than 7 days before the passage of the bill. If during that 1-week period anyone objects to it, the earmark would die unless it could secure a majority of all the votes in that House of Congress.
The earmarking process today that is used in government is corrupting. It is putting Republicans and Democrats in prison. We have abused this so much so that an enormous amount of abuses have come into play. And Duke Cunningham, for example, is a Republican, is in prison today. He was a war hero, served in Congress. We have other members abusing these programs. And what we need is a real reform. We know what the reform is. We don't need to think about it for a year. The Citizens Against Government Waste have put forward real appropriations earmark reform, and I have signed on to that pledge. That pledge basically says that these things appropriations need to come within the budget. What's happened is there's something called airdrop earmarks and dark of night types of earmarks where they put them on bills that have nothing to do with spending. That's a broken system, and it means that government can spend because they think it's their money. So the proposal that I've signed on to basically says that these appropriations must be debated in the House and the Senate. They have to come through an authorization process. They must be transparent. They can't go to special interests, local special interests. They have to be competitively bid. It is a criteria where we need to go. There are great people, conservatives, who are fighting for this type of reform, and I have signed on to that reform. Senator Tom Coburn is also leading in charge to reform this kind of process so that the spending in Washington, D.C. will be reduced. Today we have horse trading, pork barrel spending projects. They passed the Bridge to Nowhere, which is $300 million to build a bridge that goes from the mainland over to an island of 50 people. Well, you could buy a Learjet for every man, woman, and child on that island and save the government money rather than spend that way. So these things are out of control. Government's spending way too much money. We need dramatic budgetary constraints. We need caps on spending. I would propose not just a balanced budget, but a cap on the percentage that the government can spend relative to the GDP. We have to go in there and really cut dramatically spending. And starting on the small things like earmarks will help us to move to the big things like entitlement.